What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Culture FC, the weekly soccer show where we talk all culturally relevant soccer topics happening off of the pitch, so we don't cover anything actually happening on it. I'm Alan, I'm here with Brendan and Louie, and this week we talk Seattle Sounders. The Seattle Sounders have been one of the MLS's most well-supported clubs throughout all the years that they've been involved in the MLS. Seattle's fan base has taken the MLS by storm. They show up to games in masses, over 40,000 people per game, in a fan base that's almost unmatched in the MLS. We wanted to get deeper, find out why the Seattle Sounders have been so successful, not only on the pitch, but off of it, and why their fan base has been so amazing and crucial to the growth of the team. So guys, if at any point during this podcast you have a question or comment on the Seattle's fan base, make sure you leave a comment in the comment section if you're watching it in video format. If you are listening to it via the podcast, make sure that you send us an email with your questions, comments, concerns, hatred, trolling, whatever it may be. And as always, make sure you're sharing this podcast with your friends, family, anyone you think would enjoy listening to the podcast. And before we get into the podcast, pause, go leave us that 5-star review, and leave us a lovely comment. Be sure to follow the Culture FC Instagram at culturef.c. A lot of behind the scenes footage, pictures, quotes, funny things that you may not get to see or hear during the podcast. We'll post them there, so make sure you follow us there. And now that you've met all of our demands, make sure you unpause the podcast, and let's get into the episode.
So what's up, guys? This week we are talking about Seattle Sounders. So when we did the episode on Atlanta and we were putting it out on the internet and everything, we actually got a lot of hate from people saying like, "Oh my God, like, these people talking about Atlanta, they're like a brand new club, they have like blah 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 blah," and they were just giving you we were getting a lot of internet animosity, Trolls. And so we're getting trolled left and right on Facebook.
But if you're not,
YouTube.
you're not doing it right.
Yeah, exactly. Reddit was really mean.
Some valid trolling though.
Some valid trolling, of course,
which we always appreciate.
Yeah, and so we realized that, we needed to give a shout out and really spotlight one of the OG supported clubs in the MLS. And so let's get right into it. And the reason why I wanted to talk about Seattle Sounders is because they were really the first big club to show that soccer had a future and a viability in the U.S. based on its average attendance, based on just a little bit of everything, and its insanity. They have averaged, since they entered the league, they have led the league in average attendance every single year, except for last year where Atlanta actually eclipsed them in average attendance record. So Seattle's average attendance in 2017 was 43,666. Atlanta's, in comparison, Atlanta had 48,200 people at every single game, which is, it's close, so it's not like it's insane.
A little skewed because of the Atlanta played in a smaller stadium.
Right, true. So it'd be good to see what happens in 2018 with both of these clubs. But it's incredible, though, that from the day they entered the league, for 9 years in a row, they were able to lead the league. So that, you have the Galaxy that didn't even get close to their numbers. You have other clubs that didn't get close to the numbers. Of course, I understand that a lot of these soccer-specific stadiums don't fit that many, but still, it's absurd to see that, in America, you have a club that is so wholeheartedly supported by its location, by its fans. And so, that's why we wanted to... It's
a part of why we got trolled a little bit, too, because we kind of used a little clickbaity title, obviously, for the podcast and for the YouTube, saying that Atlanta had the best support. And people were saying, well, they've only had the best support for a year. Why don't you guys look at a club that has had sustained fandom and support, which is completely valid point from anyone that's going to make a thing. So
insert Seattle Sounders.
yeah. So we can get into it and start talking about kind of Seattle and what they are.
Yeah. So basically, while doing research on this, some of the big reasons that kind of just came out at face value was that overall team's been very good since they've entered the MLS. They've won 4 U.S. Open Cups, made it to a couple of MLS finals, and won an MLS final. Even the last time last year they played Toronto for the final of the MLS and ended up losing, but that's 2 finals in a row that they were in. Yeah. So it's kind of like they're a very good team, so they should be well supported. And the ticket prices are cheap, relatively speaking. And someone I saw said that because Seattle lost its basketball team, the Supersonics, in 2008, which was the year before the Seattle Sounders entered the MLS. It had like a gap of sports that needed to be filled. But that didn't satisfy me in my research because all of those do point to it being well supported, but that doesn't mean that they should be putting in 40,000 people in a stadium.
A lot of cities in the U.S. are kind of in the same situation where they don't necessarily have a lot of successful sports clubs, but they also don't have a successful soccer team. So it's valid to want to kind of dig deeper and see, well, okay, what's the real reason why Seattle is so well supported?
Right. And so basically the first big reason that Seattle's so well supported is because out of all MLS clubs, out of a very large majority of MLS clubs currently, or even American soccer clubs, they are one of the very few to actually have history. And as we've spoken about in this podcast a little bit, we talk about how history is so important to a soccer club and so important to the culture of a soccer club that, it was back in that episode we were talking about our fan stories about how, I sat and read, volumes of, the history of Manchester United and all this. But it's those kind of things that, history shapes what you can talk shit about, what you can, things of that nature. And so when you have a lot of brand new MLS clubs who have only been around for, the league's only been around for 20 years, 20-so-ish years, it's hard for you to have that much history within 20 years, especially if your club was a new club that joined in, the 2000s, so it's only been around for 10 years.
Right.
But that's not the case with Seattle. The original Sounders were created in 1974, which is a pretty long time ago. That's almost 45-ish. That's almost... I'm really bad at math, so it's a little bit over 40 years. And so they have been around in one shape, form, or another since that time. And even back in the original days in the 70s, they were playing in stadiums, in several different stadiums, that they were still filling up. There was a stadium that they originally played in that the capacity was 13,000, which is a pretty good size amount for any U.S. sports event in general. And they were having, 12,000 people come to their opening match. Yep. And they actually won up that. In 1976, there was a game between the New York Cosmos and the Seattle Sounders, and they filled the Kingdome, which was the later their stadium. They filled it with 58,000 people in 1976.
Which is fat.
Yeah.
Just considering that many people that year, 1976, in the United States watching soccer, the first real big memories of soccer I have is the World Cup we held.
Yeah.
But prior to that, I didn't think there was much else.
Yeah.
But having 58,000 fans at a game, a Nassau game, nonetheless.
Yeah.
Because the MLS hadn't formed yet, right?
Right.
No, that's a ridiculous number. If looking at all the things that B was talking about, and it's funny because at that time, soccer wasn't anything near what it is now, and even now it's not hit its peak, but soccer back then was something that you just played until you were 8, until you basically could start playing Pop Warner or some other sport, right? So,
well, that number compares to NFL attendance,
right?
Especially in '74 when the NFL was by far, I think baseball was actually the most popular sport in the '70s or something like that. But either way, the NFL was the only league that could field that many people in a stadium anyway. But 58,000 people is more than what some places have fill up their stadium. The LA Rams do not have 58,000 people watching football games. If you look at photos and videos from their inaugural season in LA, the stadium wouldn't fill up. Yeah. They'd have 20,000 people at the game. Yeah. So for a soccer team in America in the 70s to fill up a stadium with 58,000 people, absurd.
Yeah. I think putting it, to compare it to something in today's modern age, it would almost be honestly an ultimate frisbee match having that many people nowadays. Yeah. That's what soccer was back then. It was just almost like a pastime. It wasn't something that people took seriously. So that's for anyone that wants to put that into modern age. I'd say probably ultimate frisbee.
That's probably the best comparison that you pulled up. That's amazing. I don't know where you came up with that, but I am
playing ultimate frisbee.
So happy that you did.
Just trying to think of a sport that was random.
No, that's perfect. I love it. Unfortunately, it didn't last too long because Nassau folded in 1983. So that, I don't know what the reasons were that the Nassau folded at the time, but the Seattle Sounders ended up, someone revived the name in indoor soccer in between 1983 and 1994, but then another team came and was created in 94, which I will call the semi-modern Sounders, were created in 94, and they played in the USL and all these other leagues that were basically equivalent to second, third, fourth division leagues. And these semi-modern Sounders, they lasted all the way until 2009 when the same ownership group had a team put into the MLS. So in reality, they just kind of quote-unquote promoted this team into the MLS in 2009. So the current Sounders have actually technically existed since 94, which is about the same time as the league, but it still goes back to 1983, or I'm sorry, 1974, their whole history. And I thought that, you know, history is so important, like I said, to the culture of a club, that I was reading accounts of people who, the guy who owns them now, he revived them in 94 because he used to go to games in the 70s when he was a kid and fell in love with the sport because of the Sounders.
I think it's also important to note that it's good for fans to kind of get stuck into the history. Like, it's really cool to look back, but also it's important in terms of history. It just shows that the club was always present there. So they always had, it's almost like their marketing was really good, because if you always knew that the Sounders were there, over time it kind of gives that sustainability to just the name of it alone, right? So people knew who they were as a name. That helps people better connect to it without even having to really understand any history. It's easier to connect with something that you know has kind of been there for a while.
Right, so it's like the name as if it got entrenched in the people and the way they spoke. It got entrenched in the people of Seattle and in the essence of Seattle, which I'm actually going to come back to later before the next big topic. But because they've been around for so long, the reason why history is important is because one of the reasons why history for a club is important is that you cultivate rivalry. And the Sounders have had a rivalry with both the Portland Timbers and the Vancouver Whitecaps, which are now currently all three teams in the MLS, which has allowed them to continue their rivalry through the decades. But this is one of the only... I was actually surprised when I read how far back this rivalry went. This goes back to 1974, the original Nassau days, where all three teams were original Nassau teams. So I found it fascinating that the Seattle Sounders were able to cultivate this culture based on this rivalry, right? These are games that the teams could be... No matter where they are in the standings, they could play each other, and that's a big match. And that's how it is in other parts of the world. You have, look at how important these dates are when you're talking about the conversation about soccer around the world, like El Clasico. You'll sit down. I remember when I was 16, I didn't give a shit about either Real Madrid or Barcelona, but you'd watch it because you're like, ooh, this is a really big game. To this day, I still do, At the same time, Manchester United versus Liverpool, every time, and no matter where they are in the standings. I remember back when United had that shit season where we finished 7th or 6th or whatever it was, and Liverpool didn't do that great that year either, but it was just that game still mattered so much. I can give you other examples.
It's the one-up of the fans that you get to beat this rival of yours. And the funny thing that, especially in soccer, is that hatred really brings people together. So
it's weird.
This one group of people hating another group of people, it really makes you band together and almost join forces and kind of hate this other group of people, which for the history of the Sounders, if they've had that for so long, it builds that hate, it builds that passion towards hating the other teams, which is fantastic for any fan base that's trying to grow.
And even potential fans too. It shows that they have a solid foundation in which they have history. Their name has always stayed the same to some degree. They've never strayed too far away from the path. They never moved different states, and they have this bitter rivalry, which shows that we care about this, and this other team, we've been battling them for so long. You better care about it too.
And rivalry games are good too because they're usually the most hyped up events, and you can get new fans through these events. So someone may not know anything about the Sounders. They go to a bar the day that there's a rivalry game, and they see this commotion, this crazy heat, this passion for this club. And maybe from then they're like, wow, this is something that I could really get behind and start trying to understand. And then, that passion starts to build. So definitely I think rivalry and them having that competition with other teams has helped them gain the fans that they've had.
For sure. And it was so cool because the fans actually, they essentially in a weird way formalized this competition between the three teams, which, what's funny what is funny to me about their rivalry between the Sounders, the Timbers, and the Whitecaps is that it's a rivalry of 3 teams versus usually a rivalry of 2 teams. And these 3 teams compete for something called the Cascadia Cup, which is a fan-run and owned officialized cup that they actually formalized a little while back. But it was originally just like they would call it the Cascadia Cup because of, I think it's like the Cascadia region. I don't necessarily know.
Corner of America / Canada.
And so I don't know. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, comment below. Tell me I'm stupid and what it actually is. But basically, they were already competing for this Cascadia Cup back in '74, and essentially they've been able to keep up the Cascadia Cup every single year since then, even without them being in the MLS, even them being in different divisions or different leagues technically, but they were able to keep it going. And it's really unique to me that it's these 3 teams that have really always been battling for this one trophy, to the point that then the fans went and got a real trophy made, and now there's an actual trophy that's awarded. The way it works, they basically play a little mini league within the league every year, so they'll play each other a total of, each team plays each other 3 times, so then at the end of it, it's like whoever has the most points gets the Cascadia Cup, and it's cool because they're all within the MLS, so they're already going to play each other no matter what. And you know, it's just thinking about some of these other derbies in the.
Well, it's cool because this is like completely removed from having any corporate powers behind it. It's completely run by fans, which goes into kind of how fans play a role with the club. Not just being fans, they're more than just the fans, right? They have the ability to do things like this. That's something that's pretty unheard of. When I heard about this Cascadia, I don't know many other fan bases in the world that have that power or have had that privilege to be able to make a tournament.
Yeah, establish your own tournament in a league that you don't own.
I was trying to think of that. I was trying to think of something that even remotely resembled it, and I just can't. So that is something amazing.
That would be like if, I don't know, Manchester United, Leeds, and Liverpool had created a mini league in England and have been playing it for 50 years, 40 years.
But it's amazing that it still remains because with all the corporate greed and power, whatever it may be, it's something that's still completely run by fans, and it's amazing. It's such a cool idea.
Because you would think that there must be some company out there Microsoft or Dell Computers wanting to slap their logo right in front of the Cascadia Cup, but they've just said no. This is fan run, fan owned. Y'all can fuck off. Yeah, which is pretty great.
Yeah. It really makes the fans feel powerful, and maybe there's a sense of connection there. That's unheard of, I think.
Right, and I mean, if you any video you see on YouTube about the Portland Timbers versus the Seattle Sounders, one funny video that I was watching is that there's a bar that's right down the street from the Portland Timbers stadium, and these Seattle Sounders guys were trying to get into the bar because they're like, we're trying to watch some pregame stuff before we go to the thing, or try to go to the watch the game. Yep. The bouncer goes, no, you can't come in. The guys are wearing Seattle jerseys, and the guy goes, no, you can't come in. And the dude was so dumbfounded. He's like, because it's America. He was not imagining this ever happening. And he's like, are you serious? Yeah. And he goes, the guy dead face goes, yeah, no, you can't come in. Yeah. And he literally, the Portland Timbers bouncer guy was like, nah, you can't come in. Yeah. And they you can physically, I've never been to the Northwest of America, but I want to go and everything. But so I can't see this from my personal perspective, but seeing it on YouTube, pretty much I'm there. So it's
I'm basically there with them.
I thought it was so crazy that it was just you cannot come into a bar.
Yeah, it's different. It's different culture than what we regularly see in sports. I mean, normally, Pat's game, you can go into any bar that the city that they're playing at, get in there, watch the game, maybe yell a few things at some other fans, but nothing ever gets rid of that.
You might yell something stupid and get your ass beat if you go into a random team's bar, but they're not going to stop you from going in.
Yeah, not stop from going in.
Yeah, that's your own fault for trying to go in and not expecting to get heckled.
Yeah.
So I found that really cool, which is one of those things that maybe I was very ignorant because we're Revs fans, and I don't really think the Revs have any rivalry with anybody because, I don't know, I couldn't tell you. But basically...
Throw the weird very lightly.
Very lightly.
I categorize myself as a Revs.
But maybe I was very ignorant in this. I never thought that fan culture could get to this point in American soccer, and I think it's crazy. I think it's awesome. Having a common enemy to hate really does bring people together.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think back to your point, which you were talking a lot about how the fans really, it showcases that this is their club too. That's one of the things that the Seattle Sounders ownership group really understood from the beginning. They were they understand that for soccer, fans don't you're not a fan of a team. You're not the same way that you're a fan of the Knicks.
Right.
You go to Madison Square Garden, you are a fan of the Knicks. You sit there and you watch the games. You don't participate. You are an observant in an event that occurs. We understand as soccer fans that you don't observe a soccer game. You live a soccer game. You are there at the stadium. You are present for an event. You are
very much the team.
You are very much the team. You are not a I am watching. You are we are participating in this whole thing.
Yeah, we are helping our team to hopefully win with the amount of
excitement.
Cheer.
And this is very different than American sports culture, where there's a corporation with a team that wants to sell you a bunch of stuff, and basically the team is less in American sports. The team is just a vehicle to sell you shit. I know that sounds bad, but in a weird way, kind of. It's run in a corporate setting, and sure, the players
and
matter.
let's not just say that it's all just American. I mean, this is happening to world football team. A lot of teams are falling victim to this, whether being owned by foreign manager or foreign ownership. But we're seeing this happen a lot in the world of football, and not many clubs like Seattle actually involve fans, so that it isn't just a corporate money grab, right?
Right. And so, it's really cool that from the very beginning, the Seattle Sounders were like, look, you guys are fans. This team has been around for a really long time. It's not like we're trying to cultivate new fans. You guys have been here. You've supported this team for, some of you, since the 70s. It's like, originally when they got awarded the MLS team, they were thinking about changing the name. And they had 3 options and then the write-in option, and they sent it out via I think it was either newspaper or whatever form of media they used in 2008.
Email list.
I don't know what it was, but out of their 3 options, I think the total, one of the things I read was they had a total of 15,000 people respond. 12,000 people wrote in Seattle Sounders, which wasn't actually really an option they were considering. So then they looked at it and went, okay, well, we're not going to fuck with your team. Like, clearly you guys wanted this name so bad that we're going to keep it.
Right.
And so I found that amazing. They were like, oh, maybe we should be something corporate. Maybe we should adopt the regular MLS standard and name something, blah, blah, blah. But they were like, you know what? No, like, let's give the fans the power to name it and go from there.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of the first step in the management, corporate management, in seeing that the fans aren't just the fans, and it was really smart on their part to not just take that corporate step and really allowing the fans from that point on to take part ownership of the club and really being involved with the club, because you have someone that's invested into the club, they're going to be really invested and show up to the games and support their club because it's something that they are really, really in love with. And they're investing their time into taking care of and taking care for. So I think that from a management perspective, corporate management, that was, genius. And it's, again, another unheard of step in American sports.
And then that whole, the Alliance Council that they formed as well, the management, another great step. Having the 60 superfans be elected in by the season ticket holders to hold quarterly meetings on how well everything's going, hear concerns and everything. So that just shows that even more so than keeping the name, they have these 60 superfans who are diehard, who probably have the best view of what needs to change, and they actually have the opportunity to speak.
But they're not just, and it's not just like a meeting where they get to voice their concerns. They actually have the ability to vote out the GM of the president of the team every 4 years.
Yep.
Which that in American sports, that is not a concept that would ever enter anybody's mind.
Right.
This is
democracy in sports.
This is capitalism, bro.
Exactly. And so it's awesome that
and very few clubs in the world have that, right?
Some of the Spanish clubs
Barcelona,
Real Madrid,
there
Barcelona.
have to be a lot of your lower league guys. Probably.
Yeah, there's definitely some smaller ones, but those are the clubs that we often see. Like, these are really well supported clubs and have passionate fans that go up to every games. So that's again, smart move on sales.
And the fact that they didn't just brush this council off and was like, whatever, good for you guys, have your meetings, do your thing, we're not going to listen to you. They actually took it in and was like, you know what, this is now going to be a part of how we run this team. And so they make it a super big effort to include everybody who wants to be a part of their club, which is very different. Like I said, in a majority of American sports, the club is this thing that the club only encapsulates the people who play for the team, the staff, and then like the arena people. They don't really consider the fans.
No, and I honestly never even considered myself in most sports events that I go to, even if I consider myself a Red Sox fan or Bruins fan. I go to the game not thinking I'm really too involved with this sport or even the team itself. Just it's
funny because even like when I talk about soccer, and sometimes I talk about it with people that don't necessarily understand the sport, if you get caught and it's saying, well, we have a game tomorrow, or we have, and people would be like, we? Like,
what, are you on a team now?
Like, making fun. From a soccer perspective and a soccer fan, that we understand that we're the we. It's not the Pats are playing now or the Celtics are playing. It's we are playing. I need to be there to support the club because I am a part of the club, and Seattle was revolutionary in having that, in making that alliance with the fans, and I think that's the first instance in American sports where the fans became the we, and it wasn't just the I or the us, right? Which
is really, really cool. I think that one of the smartest things that the corporate, like the management structure, did was not try to force things onto the club, like onto the fans. They didn't really organize these, like, how should I say it? They basically didn't try to force anything upon them to try and like make them be fans. Right. They essentially allowed the fans to do what they wanted to do as fans and supported it. Like, for example, there's a march that happens every Seattle home game about 90 minutes to an hour before the game starts. Everybody meets up in one area of Seattle. They all get together to start singing, and they march all together to the stadium. You know, these were fans who came together and decided to do it themselves, and then the club and the staff actually got behind them and were like, yes, I'm so happy you guys are doing this. You know, they allowed the fans to create the Tifos, and they allowed the fans to basically cultivate and mold the club in what they imagine it to be in their heads. Right. You know, and so that's amazing. I think that is something that is very, very unique to not just soccer clubs, but to any American sport club.
And you try to put it into perspective with that kind of march. Like, you ever think of like going to like a Revolution game or even any sporting game, just like, yo, I'm actually going to head to the match 90 minutes early to march with my fellow fans and get hyped up.
Yeah,
but
in American sports, it's more of just like tailgate at a football game. But then again, you're still with just the people in your car, the people that your friends that you go with, and it's not this unified.
And you might high five the guy next to you, but you're not marching with him.
Yeah,
no one's gonna make a big mosh pit.
I prefer empty seats next to me anyway. Right. Put my jacket down.
right. But I think that this kind of transitions to a kind of what this means, right, for soccer, and it's the cultural aspect of Seattle Sounders and the fans. And what you're saying, Louis, of them not forcing anything and letting the fans create their own culture. And we see this because Seattle has amazing tifos and artwork that goes up. Them establishing that their own march by themselves. Them taking into account, because they own a part of this club, because they really feel endowed in the club, they're taking the responsibilities of creating that. They're doing their part in creating the atmosphere that makes their home field so intimidating to go to, and makes their fan base unmatched, almost, in a sense, right? Because they were the first ones to kind of, in my mind, when I started seeing MLS blowing up and seeing the Sounders come in, they were the first ones that were like, holy shit, like, the MLS has a chance, like American soccer has a chance.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this successful clubs nowadays with really well-established fan bases kind of mimic a lot of what they do, just allowing fans. I mean, I think Atlanta, you're seeing now a lot of this freedom to let fans do what they do, but I mean, Seattle is kind of the groundbreaker on this, right? To let the fans do this, because the fans can actually do a really good job at it.
I think what you said about the fact that your line of saying the fans did their part, it just shows that for you to have a good atmosphere, you have to have a good product on the field, but at the same time, the fans have to create a good atmosphere. And so those are two parts of the equation that really make going to a soccer game that much, like, that's why it's worth it, right? And so I think that by the club not trying to cultivate that on itself or try to force on a crappy job about it, I think makes it so much better. Having it come up organically.
Yeah, the grass, it really shows this effort to put forth a grassroots movement. Right. And it erases all capitalistic gains almost from these fans, and it almost frees them of putting money towards this team that they love, but they're not going to see anything back. But the fact that they do see something back.
It's more of a holistic growth. I'm sure the owners are happy. It's funny because I'm sure the ownership doesn't have to put as much money into marketing the club,
right?
As some other club may need to, because the fans do that. The fans that are a part of the club are doing that for them, right? The best advertisement is word of mouth. It's person-to-person advertisement,
right? And so if you're listening to this podcast, make sure you tell a couple people about this podcast.
Ooh, that's fun.
And that way, the best kind of marketing can be allowed to happen.
I like that. That was a good one.
But no, like you said, I think that all of that is really great. All of it makes for a really great experience. But why did it happen in Seattle? I think that's really the big question of all of these things are amazing, but none of these things are geographically limiting, right? All of this can happen in pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
So why is it that in a major American city, this was able to happen, right? One of the biggest reasons that I've seen through my research and through listening to people's interviews and things like that on YouTube is that Seattle's a very counterculture city. It's not it's not New York, it's not Boston, it's not whatever other big city, it's not LA. And it's always been kind of going against the grain of American culture, and they were always like, nah, we can do our own thing. We're going to be hipsters before hipsters were cool, and we're going to drink coffee a lot, and, all this stuff. Wow, those are really bad things I just said. Oh, well. And so what's the most un-American thing you can think of? For a really long time, it was soccer. Soccer was super un-American. You had people openly trashing anybody who said anything about soccer for a really long amount of time. I remember almost feeling embarrassed that my family would watch soccer as a kid because I'm like, oh shit, no one else does this, and then I didn't realize that the whole world does, and it's just in our little microcosm there are a couple people.
Even playing sometimes, growing up playing, it's just oh, you play soccer? It's like, yeah, it's
man.
I remember.
Hey man, you don't play Pop Warner?
Yeah, I played soccer when I was a little kid. I played up until 5th, 6th grade, and then I stopped. It's I didn't.
Yeah, I just kept going. Yeah.
And so I think that it's really cool because out of all the cities in America, the fact that it happened in Seattle, once you pair the two things together, kind of makes sense. Right. You know what I mean? You're pretty counterculture city. You guys like to do your own thing, ride your own wave, which is awesome. And then something comes out that's very anti-American, and people will latch onto it. And I thought that right there is probably one of the biggest reasons why it latched on geographically in Seattle, right? It also happened in Portland, but they're also really close, and the same kind of thing with Vancouver. They're relatively close as well.
That little triangle there. I don't know if it's
counterculture belt.
Are we christening that area the counterculture belt?
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really, really cool because it basically all of these things came together and created a perfect storm that then allowed by far one of the best supported clubs in the MLS to happen the way that it did.
So if you could say one major reason why you think they're the biggest, one of the biggest clubs, what would you say that reason was?
Honestly, I think that point is probably it. I mean, it just works out way too perfectly because Seattle in terms of demographic and if you look at it just as a city, it's not. I mean, it's different, but there are other places in the U.S. where soccer could work, but they haven't. And so there has to be some type of underlying kind of cultural reason to the people that live there as to why this would happen. So I'm not from there and I haven't been, unfortunately, but to me that would be it, kind of that's the hipster movement. We're going to play the sport that really is for girls. That's what it was seen at the time. And we're going to play the sport that people don't really give a shit about. Because, if you look at other cities that kind of can match to them in terms of demographic, they haven't been successful. I mean, why doesn't soccer work here necessarily? We don't know. But I think that's probably the biggest reason why.
Okay.
I personally think that I'd cheat and say that it was rivalry and history because I think to me that's such a major part of what a soccer club is the ability to be around long enough and do good things long enough. Because, well, I don't think I actually mentioned this earlier, but even in like the semi-modern Sounders days, which was between like 94 and like 2008 when they went to the MLS, they were actually winning championships in the second and third division. So, you know, they were still winning and doing that. So all of that still kind of counts as their history.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what is most important. But I actually, putting it all together, I think that one of these things being missing, I actually don't think it would have been as successful as it was.
Yeah.
Because in a weird way, I actually don't think Atlanta would have happened the way it did if it weren't for Seattle.
Oh, absolutely.
Because prior to Seattle coming in, the idea was, what, like you said, soccer was for girls and kids. It wasn't a man's sport. It wasn't something you'd watch. It wasn't anything like that. And so Seattle actually had the ability to change that through what they did but it's like almost ironic. The only reason it really, really worked was from the culture aspect of people going against the grain.
Right.
But then that helps turn people onto the sport.
Right. Well, we've seen that even with things like fashion, right? Hipsters, I think we think hipsters, I mean, it's not rude to say that. I think Portland and Seattle were kind of like, that's what you think of as the founders of being a hipster. So we see this in other elements of things that when you go against the grain, it actually ends up making things mainstream. And we've seen this with soccer fashion now, that's become going against the grain and now become high fashion and showing up in other places. So maybe Portland would talk some shit if we said that Seattle was the trailblazer for this kind of movement to make soccer popular in the U.S. But I mean, I think if they're not getting all the credit, they should be getting 80% of it.
Right. But it's something that's very interesting to think about is like, why hasn't soccer been like this in other areas? And it's kind of cool to think that Seattle is kind of what's starting to change that movement, or has changed that movement, because they have been around for a little while.
I think another part of Seattle culture, but I think what U.S. culture often doesn't get really any fame for is there are now these cultures of really strong supporters that are building up for clubs, these ultras, but there isn't that violence behind ultras from other places in the world. So I think that's something that is kind of off topic, but that Seattle does really well, and it's kind of, we've seen that they have subcultures within their supporters group that are anti-racism, being a homophobe, which is amazing because in other places in the world, you're an ultra, it means one thing, right? It has a pretty dark connotation to it.
Yeah.
And I think what Seattle does really well, and we're seeing now in smaller teams like Detroit City and even Atlanta, you're seeing the flags with the rainbow, and you're seeing things that are propagating not only support for the club, but support for just general human life. And it makes for an all-inclusiveness that I don't see in any other sport.
I actually think that's a huge point because, for certain clubs in Europe, you might love your club to the point where you want to express it in any way possible. But sometimes you might look at a club and be like, I want to be an ultra, but I don't want to fight anybody. I don't want to be in that.
I don't want to get dirty.
Right. No, I was seeing it, and the reason that even came to mind, I recently saw something of a fan in Brazil he was a gay fan at a Palmeiras game, and his own fans were chanting anti-gay slurs, and he tweeted out something and was like, well, I'm a gay guy and I'm hearing these slurs, and he got into this whole backlash with fans, blah blah blah. But when you're cultivating a culture that is including everyone, including the people from all ethnicities, all realms of the world, whatever they may be, it makes for that really good feeling and kind of ties people together. And we've seen that with Atlanta and other clubs across the country. But I think that Seattle deserves a lot of credit for that, because from everything we've seen and done research on, they do an amazing job at it, and they were kind of the first ones to be doing that. So I think that that's something that should be looked at as well.
Without a doubt. My one thing would I believe the history of it probably makes it the most important.
You think so?
I think so, just because I feel like a fan can really attach to something that's rich in history as opposed to being a brand new thing. I mean, obviously the outliers have been shown with Atlanta last year, but I think the diehard fans you can see have stayed there the longest. For sure. I
think, and it's we see that with clubs nowadays that are in the USLs, the NASLs, and then they fold, and then you lose the fan bases that were there. So I do think that, I mean, obviously all these things play a role, but I mean,
that's my
100%. I think history. I mean, you have the same club, same name, same this. People are gonna
remember the name.
Yeah.
The big like contradictory point is like when someone listens to this, and I was actually about to ask you guys like, what do you think other teams could learn from this? But then I realized that I don't want the other teams necessarily to learn anything from this, because I don't want the Revs to try and force fan culture. I don't want the Revs to try and force a rivalry. Like, how bad would it be if like the Revs came out and was like, yeah, you know what? Now we're gonna be rivals with Toronto. We just decided that we are gonna have the super bitter rivalry with these two clubs. It's not gonna work.
I will say this: I don't know if this would be forcing culture if all clubs started practicing in offering parts of the ownership to fans. I think that's a really smart move in getting people involved in becoming. I think that yes, you can say now, oh yeah, they're copying other clubs, but honestly, when you get someone, I mean, think about it just from a financial standpoint. If you're investing time and you're investing things, and I'm saying, oh, I own part of this club, I'm gonna do things to make sure that this team succeeds from whatever vantage point I have. So if I'm the fan and I own part of the New England Revolution, I'm going to go to the games. I'm going to go. I'm going to yell. I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that the Reds are getting the best out of me as a fan.
Which is actually not unheard of in American sports. If anybody knows this, the Green Bay Packers are 100% owned by fans.
Oh, really?
Which is the reason why the Green Bay Packers have a 100-year long wait list for season tickets.
Yeah, you can't get season tickets.
People are born around Green Bay, and they as soon as the baby's born, they'll put the baby's name on the wait list.
Yeah.
No way!
The
I
wait
didn't know
list
that.
is that long.
Yeah, it's
that's
like
insane.
Stupid. It's like you can't get a season
And
ticket.
Packers, that's some cold weather up
Think about
there.
it. No one wants to watch the sports game in Green Bay,
And they're not even spectacular.
And think about it. Yeah, I mean, even the
Seahawks.
Seahawks implemented the Sounders rule. Now the fans own part of the Seahawks.
Which, if you didn't know, the owner of the Seahawks is actually a minority owner in the Sounders.
Right.
But he only took this idea
After.
once Drew Carey, I believe, actually forced them to adopt it. And then he goes, ooh, very interesting.
Yeah.
We're going to put that over here in the Seahawks, too.
Thanks, Drew.
Right. So, and think about it. I mean, these clubs, I think that they would not be taking a wrong step in just offering that as a possibility.
I actually don't think it would even have to, it could go to the ownership. I actually love that idea. But even just giving the fans a voice.
Right.
Because I think that ownership isn't just monetary. I think ownership is also what you feel is yours. You know, by giving your fans a voice, that allows them ownership without necessarily giving them money, because you do have to run your
Make
club.
sure that their opinions are heard and the actions are being taken based off of what they're saying. Absolutely. Right. Yeah, that's another completely viable. Yeah, make the fans feel like they are more than just fans. Like they are actually a part of the club.
I think that point right there is the one thing that I think that Seattle has done much different, than a lot of clubs. And I think that made all the difference. Aside from all the history, which is really awesome, aside from, the cultural aspects of it, but the fact that they were able to look at their fans and go, you know what, you guys are this club.
Right.
We just run it.
Right.
It's like, that's important. I think that distinction would be the only thing I'd want to have be adopted across the board.
Yeah.
Because that's really the reason we started the podcast, is culture. It's about soccer culture. There is no soccer culture if it's forced, or if it becomes, it might still have some semblance, but it won't be as deep or as important if it felt forced.
Right.
But yeah, I think that is a good place to stop, unless you guys have anything you'd like to throw in terms of opinions about this. Or
No, I think that covers a lot of it.
Build it and they will come.
So if you're a Seattle Sounders fan out there and you listen to this podcast, thank you so much for doing that. But if we missed anything, or if there's another reason that you think we should have discussed, or was actually another really big reason, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us or actually comment on the video on Facebook or YouTube. If there's anything you think that we should have covered, please let us know. If you guys have any suggestions for another city you'd like, or another team that you'd like us to cover, please comment that as well. I think this was a cool episode. I really enjoyed doing this one, and that was cool.
We'd love to come out there sometime soon and experience that firsthand.
Yeah.
Sure. Man, I would love to go to a game between Seattle and Portland. I heard that one's legit crazy.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
I mean, all the videos I've seen have been pretty wild. So
House Essen will come.
Yeah, House Essen will come. Yeah. But all right, guys.
And there we have it. Another fantastic episode in the books. I really enjoyed this episode personally because I hadn't really known too much about the Seattle Sounders prior to this episode. Their rich cultural history and just the sheer faith they put in their fan base really astounds me, and I am excited to follow them as well this upcoming MLS season. So if you're used to listening to us on your favorite podcast app whilst giving us a 5-star review, we also make YouTube videos. You can check us out on our weekly basis. We're great, we're fun to watch, and kind of get a little personal taste to it all. And as you will see, the link will be in the description. And we hope that you will join us next week. Thanks again, guys.